to begin by welcoming a lot of the new listeners and people who are finding us and beginning to follow. I do hope you are encouraged by the many episodes that are getting put out. We have a lot of material that's coming, a lot of good testimonies and things. You may be able to tell in my voice a bit of a sound difference. We're feeling better, but like many, whatever bug that's been going around, it has affected us pretty severely for many, many weeks now. But like I say, we're on the recuperation side of things. So bear with me in this. I hope it won't be too much of a distraction. Today, I do want to put out some information regarding a lot of the ministry here in western Wisconsin. Some of the things I'm going to get into may be new for many of you that you haven't heard yet. In Minneapolis, it has gotten the attention, I would say, not only the nation, but throughout the world. And our area of ministry here is on the outskirts of the city. The city is roughly 45 minutes to an hour from the area that we're in. So what happens in Minneapolis very much affects a lot of these rural surrounding areas. And though the things happening in Minneapolis affects the surrounding areas, I do want to make very clear as well, Minneapolis is not representative of a lot of the reality of what I'm seeing take place on the ground. A lot of the ideas and beliefs are not representative of a lot of these surrounding areas. So to begin, let me just share a bit about who we are and what we're doing. My family, we're a missionary family. We began ministry back in 2010. Short-term work actually began around 2006, but this has always been a passion of ours. It's something that God began to stir in our hearts. Though we never really had set our desire on being a full-time missionary, this is something God brought forth. And so in 2010, I believe we began fundraising. 2011 is when we left for Mexico. What is significant during these early years is that drug war began in Mexico around 2008. And as God was preparing us to come into full-time ministry, this was a topic my friend and I discussed quite frequently regarding the conditions in Mexico, the violence that was starting to escalate. At the time when we left for the field, it was a time in the drug war where many organizations out of America were simply leaving Mexico, because the violence had become too great. And ultimately, this is obviously a decision a lot of organizations and missionaries have to make for themselves. But for us, this was an area in which we had spent much prayer. We knew in our hearts God intended us and wanted us to go. And if I were to sum up it was probably ended up being about 5-6 years traveling throughout Mexico. We worked in the persecuted state of Chiapas. We partnered with numerous pastors throughout the country. And God really blessed and multiplied that work over those years. Though there were ransoms, there were threats of violence. A lot of people we ministered to over those years, husbands would be taken, children would be taken, wives would be taken. There were a lot of burdens. But what God began to do is begin to teach us and show us His provisions, His care, His power, and ultimately the power of the Word to change hearts. It was in 2016 when we began a church plant on the U.S. side of the border. We began to realize that with a lot of the trafficking, particularly human trafficking, coming into the United States, many were beginning to enter in from numerous different nations south of the border. They would set up residence in areas called colonias, and these were just simply very impoverished areas where many of these different nations came in, all brought in through cartel, and simply began to try to start a life. One of the first colonias that myself and my family were getting connected into, I was a bit surprised when the people there began warning us immediately. They said, keep your kids close. The cartel are now taking both little boys and girls. What I had not realized is much of the cartel activity that was so prevalent throughout Mexico and a lot of parts of Latin America was very much alive and well in this border region. God began to reveal to us a lot of this world. We learned, I don't want to get into too long in all of what these years brought forth, but we learned how the process works. We learned how a lot of these illegals enter in. During these years of 2016 to 2020, you had mass stash houses. The cartel not only brought people to the border, but once they crossed the border, they would then collect them up again on the U.S. side. Oftentimes, a lot of these illegals coming in would race to Border Patrol for protection from these cartel elements. It was not uncommon for ICE to go in and find a stash house. There'd be a stash house of 120 women and kids and men left to die and starve and thirst to death. This border region is extremely hot, and you'd see regularly in the news stories of different stash houses found. This was the job of Border Patrol. This was the job of immigration, otherwise known as ICE. These are the federal officials that would chase down pedophiles, child sex traffickers, drug traffickers, the various criminal elements that are simply an extension of a lot of the organized crime throughout Latin America. These are the men and women who I am now hearing being called Gestapo, being called Nazis. The Border Patrol, for a long time, they actually have a season along the border that they call rescue season. It was a time of year in which the summer heat would increase, and because of the system and what it was and how it worked, it was just simply understood that their job would be recovering many bodies, be recovering many who need medical care, oftentimes left by cartel factions to simply die. The women are raped and beat and left. A lot of terrible things happened, and it's these departments, these men and women that would be there in those moments. And so I do want to publicly just thank, Border Patrol, Immigration, Homeland Security, those that are now trying to re-implement some form of order in the United States. Those who have literally been on the front lines of a war since the 80s on the southern border. Thank you for what you do. And honestly, I don't believe the majority hold these views that you're seeing come out of Minneapolis. To put a lot of this in context, I want to share this. It was in 2014, 2015. Many know a lot of my generation. We're the generation of war. Since September 11th up until Afghanistan shut down and tragically in 2020, the way it went, a lot of my friends, my generation, has paid dearly when it comes to the battlefield. One acquaintance I know, and many don't realize the extent of combat operations that have been done on the southern border over the years. But it was in either 2014 or 2015. This acquaintance I had, he was part of the Rangers, and he was deployed in the El Paso area under President Obama. He had done multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Again, he's a form of Special Forces soldier. And after this tour, he left and plainly said, I have seen more body mutilations, beheadings, death than I've seen in his prior tours in combat. This is kind of the nature of what the southern border was. Now, fast forward to 2020, when we began the Hispanic ministry here in western Wisconsin. One of the areas I was really surprised in as I began work here, I had met a gentleman pretty quick. He was from Honduras. He shared in detail the trafficking that takes place throughout this area. He was in a bit of crisis, and I think he shared far more than what he intended. But here in western Wisconsin, in a nutshell, you do have mass cartel elements. A lot of the Hispanic population, they're from numerous different countries. I would say there's probably anywhere from 7 to 8 different nationalities that have been part of our church over the years, from various countries of Latin America. But what was happening between these years of 2020 to 2024, I would get requests for help because the cartel would be after a particular person requesting the war tax. Some of these construction teams coming out of the cities, they would openly profess and say, "Hey, we make a lot of money, but the cartel is taking a lot of it, and the war tax is essentially a fee that these drug organizations charge the workers, and they have to pay it monthly." This is common in many countries. Oftentimes, a lot of families that are looking at returning back home, this is one of their big concerns, is their home areas often have to pay war tax. If you're running a business of sorts, you're paying the cartels to leave you alone, not kill you, not take your children. It's coercion. This was happening here up until last year. Last year's the first year I did not receive any requests for assistance in a situation of the war tax. Another area I was often petitioned in was regarding family members that would disappear when they're getting trafficked in on that southern border. From the years 2020 to 2024, it was not uncommon that the Hispanic population in the surrounding area in western Wisconsin would lose a cousin, lose a brother or sister. These were often extremely dire situations because this is what disappearing is. When I hear that ICE is coming in and kidnapping and people are disappearing, this is just absolutely not true. When you get into the deportation process, again, it's a process that is driven by federal statute. It's not a very radical thing. It's very judicial. I have sat through deportation hearings, seen how they work. I don't want to bore you with the details, but it's very reasonable. When Ulysses was deported, it is actually a very, very good process, considering what it has been in the past. In the past, I've seen it where when families are deported, they get brought back into Mexico, and the cartel are coming back around to take them again. I remember I was speaking at a place, and it was the night that Ulysses was supposed to be crossing into Mexico, and I was supposed to have heard from him in the afternoon, and my wife was teasing me a bit because I'm not prone to anxiety. I don't generally, that's not generally a feeling I had, but if I were to describe how I was feeling, I was anxious for him. I had not heard from him, and I'm thinking, well, the cartel took him because this was pretty common in the past. If people were turned around at the border, you had to remain in Mexico camps. A lot of these camps would be locked down. We ministered in these for a long time on the southern border. But these camps would have to be locked because the cartel would take the people. This entire system was extraordinarily lawless. It's one of my greatest frustrations of ministry over all the years is because the United States so actively participated with the cartels and trafficking people in. And so from 2016 is kind of the first time God began revealing some of these dark truths to me in regards to human trafficking. And so the human labor trafficking, I saw remnants of it beginning probably 2016, 2017. But it took off in 2020. President Biden's administration were 100% behind this type of activity. But this is how the system worked, and it falls under the diversity, equity, inclusion. It falls under this political mantra of bringing the neighbor, the stranger, the refugee. Those who know me know I stand strongly against these kind of teachings, even in the church, because I believe the church has to be very specific in what we're saying, because what they're saying falls in line with a lot of this Marxist political philosophy that's used to human traffic. But this is the system. This is how it worked. So you have not only the United States itself, You have numerous other nations. I do have a lot of other podcasts on this, so I don't want to get into too much detail. Scroll through our menu, pick out some of these other teachings regarding the southern border, and listen to those, because I get into much more detail. But simply, the nutshell is this is how the system worked. You had political activists. Political activists would go to particularly impoverished areas all throughout Latin America. This took place in other continents as well. But these activists would come in, and it would be a community, and they would find impoverished communities, promise these people, the population, those that if they came to the United States, President Biden would give them citizenship. They'd have fishing boats and cabins, and most throughout Latin America see programming from the United States. And so they immediately associate that particular life of what they see on TV potentially being theirs. These activists, their funding came through your tax dollars, these big omnibus bills. It would go to their nonprofits. It would come to them. And anyway, these funds would be used to recruit many of these nations to come into the United States. Oftentimes, these families would sell the little they have. The money would go to the activists. The activists would then take these people and hand them to the drug cartels, and they would begin the journey up to the border. These numerous different drug organizations, they made billions of dollars. They would recruit a lot of the young men and force them into the slave trade. The slave trade is what you see taking place here in the United States with these various marijuana camps. They would force them into slavery in the drug cartel itself, the frontline fighting. There's mass graves all throughout Mexico. This is well documented through the United Nations, a humanitarian department. It's not a secret. Many of these areas I've preached in over all the years, one of the things I hear everywhere is, pray for me. My brother went to the United States, and we never heard from him since. One lady, I was preaching in a church, a Hispanic church in Tennessee, and had shared a bit about the mission with Joe and reaching a lot of these men in the drug trade. And she came up afterwards in tears and simply said to me, "Thank you for what you're doing. They killed my whole family." This is personally for me probably one of the areas of life that I have seen to be the most tragic, because you can't stop it. And much of my nation is completely unaware of it. And then even if you do share it with them and it doesn't fit their political narrative, they simply ignore you. But in the same breath, this is where God has mobilized his church. We do thank you so many for your prayers, for your continued support, because God is doing a lot of incredible things. One of the prayers that I've had for many years is that God places us where we need to be at the proper time. And if I were to describe a lot of our ministry in the last 16 years, this is very much what God has been doing, and we're very humbled by this and grateful for this. In 2026, now moving forward here in western Wisconsin, with a lot of the Hispanic population, I do want to speak into what I see taking place on the ground. First, when we speak about the deportations, again, I think it's very important to recognize a lot of the history that is built up to this moment that we're now seeing in the United States. Every administration, as long as I remember, as long as I've been doing ministry, and I know even well before that, deportations, even inter-nation deportations, right? Not just simply turning around at the border, but being in the cities, collecting and arresting various criminals. The reality is the cartel elements, the criminal elements, are a huge part of a lot of Latin America culture. It's a huge part of our culture here in the United States. The reality is sin is rampant, evil is rampant, and when the day's done, the Trump administration has made it very clear we are removing the criminal elements in the United States. Prior administrations have done likewise. So you may say to me, well, Travis, why does it seem so much more chaotic? And this really gets into the root of the politics behind all of this. What you have taking place is simply your states are no longer cooperating with your federal authorities. Here in Wisconsin, I know Governor Evers has put out a notice and an order to various departments and bureaucrats to not cooperate with any kind of federal officials that may come in. I know firsthand on the ground you have local police notifying various employers and areas of any type of ICE presence that's coming in. And ultimately, I believe this particular problem is going to have to be litigated in court. You're not just dealing with a sanctuary city, you're dealing with sanctuary states, sanctuary counties, sanctuary townships, jurisdictions. And it honestly is, yes, an extreme mess. So, for example, I know one of the key factors that took place, particularly in Minneapolis, is your federal officials come in with what they call detainers. These detainers are simply, they've identified those here illegally that have criminal charges, and it can range from anything. It could be assault, it could be child sex trafficking, it could be drugs. And so when state jails have these particular individuals in custody, your federal officials will come in and request, okay, we've put a detainer on this person, we'll come pick them up. What these state political leaders are doing, officials, and I don't know all the ins and outs of the process, but essentially these detainers are not being honored. And so even the jails are releasing these various criminals back onto the streets, and the federal government said, no way, we are going to get them. And so in Minneapolis, I believe there was a detainer of about 1,500. It could be less. It's hard to know a lot of these reports if they're accurate or not. But Tom Homan was in an interview. He made it very plain. Hey, let us in your jails, give us these people, and we won't bother you. So since President Trump has come into office, this has been a very noticeable shift. Your states have decided that they are not going to honor various federal detainers. They are actively fighting against all types of deportations. And I guess when it's done, it simply is what it is. I believe legally there's probably a lot that has to get sorted out here, because what's difficult with this is, for example, if a local jail is releasing various criminals because they don't want to turn them over to federal authorities, at what point does this become aiding and abetting? For example, this local police department that warns various employers of ICE coming in, if ICE has a warrant for a child sex trafficker, they're able to enter any premise they want to detain that individual. And this is where things really get messy on the ground, because now you have state officials trying to hide and protect a particular cartel guy or sex trafficker. And at what point does this legally become aiding and abetting? And certainly it's puzzling to me. When Ulysses was deported, he was deported under President Biden's administration. The federal authorities had a detainer on him. He had some other drug charges, and the jail handed him over. That seems very reasonable. Why would that not be the case for any president or administration that's in power? This is where human depravity and sin really become to be a major issue. And I guess for that, I would just simply encourage the church. These are the things of the world. We can't necessarily change them single-handedly. However, we stand on the righteousness of Jesus Christ. And please be in prayer over these things. I encourage the church to be extremely cautious when it comes to these political things, particularly what we're seeing take place in Minneapolis. Don't try to brush over this as some kind of cause of justice. We're dealing with mass corruption on so many levels. Let's be in prayer that repentance will come, and that once again, our nation will honor Jesus Christ, that revival will break out across this nation and the world. I do want to share a little bit about the people, the Hispanics throughout this area that we've gotten connected with over the last 5 years now here in western Wisconsin. One of the things that is really notable to me and stands out is I believe a large majority that are here simply have just been tricked and deceived into coming. Each one has been trafficked in through the cartel. That's literally the only way you get in. These various political activists and factions are outright liars and deceivers. And it is very tragic in so many ways what the Hispanic population itself has just endured and gone through. One of the things that was interesting to me is I'd meet new people on the street, and particularly they'd survive getting into the United States, and they'd find me, and one of the things they'd say to me is, "A pastor, I was told I would be giving a chicken. Where do I get my chicken?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about? You're going to be given a chicken?" "Well, yes, I was told that President Biden was going to give me a chicken when I got here," and I'd have to tell them, "No, you're not. President Biden's not going to give you a chicken. You were lied to." And it sounds humorous in some ways, but this is the sheer reality of what a lot of this trafficking scheme has been. It is ugly. I am highly opposed to it on so many levels. But what I'm beginning to realize is a lot of this population truly did not understand that it was illegal to come in the way that they did. And now that they're beginning to see a lot of these raids taking place, they're recognizing, oh, I have done wrong. I think one of the high points in all of this is we have had many come to Christ. The church has been gathering. Many have been growing in their faith. And now, as they're facing this reality of being sent back home, they're not facing it in hopelessness. They're not facing it in emptiness. And we do rejoice in this very much. I do covet your prayers so much in regards to this next year. We are counseling those that are coming to us and confessing that they're not in good standing with the government. We wholeheartedly believe once we're in Jesus Christ, once you're a servant of Christ, we are up to uphold a nation's laws. We are not excluded from various things we may not like for whatever reason. We honor God, and we will honor the country we're in. In all my years of ministry, my papers would be checked in Mexico. I would get pulled over because I was that white guy too far south in that country. And should I have tried to ram immigration with my vehicle? Should I have screamed and yelled and shook my fist and cursed because they were checking my papers? Like, fundamentally, all countries have their various requirements for entry into the nation. Now, that being said, this population that is here have been a victim of a very elaborate human trafficking scheme for labor. And I am very sympathetic to what so many have had to suffer simply trying to better their lives. That being said, what I see with the population locally, they're not militant. They're not what you see out of Minneapolis with the shaking fists and screaming and yelling. They're highly respectful. Not all are necessarily fearful of being deported. They recognize, some are weighing the risks longer term. And when I speak of that, it's a lot of them who are not believers. They're associates we have through evangelism. I get petitioned a lot for helping with different court cases personally from a lot of this population. Because oftentimes court documents are all in English and they don't understand it and they're in legal trouble and they're scared. And so God's provided many opportunities in ministry in this way as well to ultimately preach Jesus Christ. I want many who know us know our heart in regards to our very strong stance on repentance, on faith in Jesus Christ. We don't make excuses for sin. We don't coddle sin. We don't embrace sin. We must flee it. And by God's grace over these years, we've been blessed to see just abundant growth in a lot of the Hispanics living around the area. Many are making preparations to return home this next year. I think one of the dynamics that a lot of Americans don't understand, and in particular our political leaders, is when we get this idea, well, we need workers here in the United States. And so that has been the premise of trafficking in this population. But what's happened in their home countries is your men have emptied the country and they're all here. This has devastated their economies. These families that are returning back home, they're literally returning back home to no job opportunity at all, none. These various nations economically are devastated. So just keep that in mind, even throughout this next election year. When you're hearing this idea that we need the workers, we need the workers, we need the workers, their countries are paying a dear price because of it. You have no small business. It is dire, and ultimately what happens is these drug cartels have a great open door for recruiting a lot of these kids and even adults into their trade. One of the things Joe and I hear a lot at these drug sites is these men justify the work they do because they need the money, and they don't make much at all. Maybe $400 a month, possibly a bit more. It's a very, very, very difficult situation. So, church, please keep all these things in your prayers. Remember the work we're doing here, Western Wisconsin. Of course, remember Joe as he's toiling with the work in the drug mission effort. We appreciate you all so much. God bless.